this fish is bad. It's off.
Bad? In that case, if you don't want to eat it, you probably want to wear it.
That utterly bizarre moment was from 2002's Swept Away, widely regarded as one of the worst movies ever made. And at the time, people assumed it was lousy because it was just a vanity project that Guy Ritchie directed for his then-wife, Madonna. After all, the two films he made previously, Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, were both truly great. But in retrospect, Swept Away was really just the first clear sign that maybe Guy Ritchie should stick to gangster movies. But before we get into it, why not take a moment to subscribe to the Nerdstalgic channel? By 1998, Quentin Tarantino had directed Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, and Jackie Brown. All three were, in one way or another, about hip gangsters who riffed their way through tightly woven small crime stories. They had punchy dialogue, non-traditional structures, and each was arguably a masterpiece. The world was high on the director and his style, so everyone took notice when a British film called Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels began drawing comparisons. Lock, Stock is about four small-time hoods who find themselves going to desperate lengths to square a debt to a gangster who cheated them in a card game. Among others, the movie starred future Guy Ritchie mainstay Jason Statham, and there are certainly similarities to Tarantino's work. Ritchie's movie was also about an ensemble of hip, small-time criminals caught up in a web of underworld intrigue, and like many of Tarantino's characters, they riffed razor-sharp dialogue on topics ranging from things trivial to sinister.
You can go on a plastic bag tonight, John. You owe what you owe. And by the time this tan's faded, you want to have paid.
Lock, Stock was a hit with audiences and earned positive reviews. It won a BAFTA for Film of the Year and established Ritchie a reputation as a promising up-and-comer. Expectations were high, and in 2000, Ritchie would release the movie that would cement his reputation as an auteur, Snatch. Once again, the movie was a London-set, small-stakes crime story featuring an ensemble cast of colorful criminals and lovable losers. And once again, it utilized the talents of Jason Statham and Vinnie Jones. Like its predecessor, Snatch went all in on bantering slang dialogue, flashbacks, gallows humor, and a whole lot of foul language.
Shut up and sit down, you big bald f***.
But thanks to the buzz around Lock, Stock, Ritchie was able to bring some star power to the proceedings in the form of Brad Pitt, who got to play one of the most memorable roles of his career, the bare-knuckle boxer, Mickey O'Neill. The movie was also a perfect marriage between style and substance. The rhythms of Ritchie's dialogue and the calamitous plot developments faced by his characters are mirrored in the frenetic pace of his storytelling, and the abrupt freeze frames, use of slow motion and speed ramping, as well as music and narration, help put the audience in the minds of his characters. And it worked brilliantly. Snatch was a box office success and, over time, developed into something of a cult classic. Today, it's easy to identify as the movie that perfected the filmmaking style Guy Ritchie is most famous for, but it wasn't immediately perceived as a masterpiece. In fact, while it fared well with audiences, critics were more mixed on the film. Roger Ebert, for example, thought the movie was too similar to Lock, Stock, a feeling echoed by several others.
This movie is basically just the first movie recycled.
And if that was a problem, it was worse than they knew because both movies were preceded by the 1995 short film, The Hard Case, which contained many of the stylistic earmarks of Ritchie's more famous works. It even used several characters and situations that clearly served as prototypes to elements of Lock, Stock and Snatch. The short isn't publicly available, but a circulating version with broken audio proves that whether it's from his personal experiences or something about the genre that uniquely ignites his imagination, Guy Ritchie was a natural with gangster films from day one. But perhaps to avoid being pegged as a one-trick pony, or maybe because in 2000 he married Madonna, Ritchie's third feature would be the now notorious Swept Away. And to call it a huge stylistic departure would be a massive understatement. Stepping outside of his comfort zone to awkward effect, Ritchie's remake of Lena Wertmüller's 1974 film was ostensibly a romantic comedy, only pretty much no one found it romantic or funny. The movie was savaged by critics and rejected by audiences. Most of the criticism was directed at Madonna's performance, but Ritchie's didn't fare much better. Ritchie then wisely stepped back toward the crime genre and repartnered with Jason Statham for Revolver. But apparently still determined to prove he could do something different, he infused the film with philosophical and religious references. Together with its confusing, frenetic plot, the movie turned out to be something of a mess, and it struck out with both critics and audiences. Possibly sensing that he needed to return to safer creative ground, in 2007 Ritchie jumped into production on Rock'n'Rolla. It was another Cockney gangster movie, but unlike the tonally odd Revolver, Rock'n'Rolla was more like a cousin to Lock, Stock, and Snatch. Reviews were more mixed than they were for those films, but the movie was a success at the box office, and while its success seemed to lend some credence to the growing suspicion that Ritchie was only good at making one type of movie, it was generally considered a return to form. It was also enough to earn Ritchie a chance to direct 2009's Sherlock Holmes, starring Robert Downey Jr., who was at the time experiencing something of a career renaissance thanks to his wildly popular role as Iron Man. The movie leaned into elements of the original stories Ritchie felt had been underplayed in previous adaptations, and his Holmes was a much more action-heavy version of the character than the public was used to seeing. As a fan of Holmes since childhood, Ritchie's connection to the work gave it something of a spark, and while critics were mixed to positive about the film, audiences came in droves. It scored big at the box office and earned a sequel, but it also signaled the start of a new phase in Ritchie's career, the big studio movie phase, and it would be a strange time for his fans. That's because while 2011's Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows was a box office success, it didn't fare as well with critics, and it felt less like a Guy Ritchie movie than the first one did, which is to say Ritchie's own creative style was proving difficult to reliably wed to the standard trappings of big-budget studio films. It's a problem that would become more evident over the course of his next 3 movies: The Man from U.N.C.L.E., King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, and Aladdin. The Man from U.N.C.L.E., for example, was cited for Ritchie's stylish direction, but writing spy stories was apparently not his thing, and the movie couldn't overcome a lousy script that even Quentin Tarantino thought was stupid. The movie flopped and lost $80 million for the studio. And despite a general consensus that it had some fun action in it, King Arthur also suffered from a subpar script. It was a historic bomb, panned by critics and ignored by audiences. It lost nearly twice what Man from U.N.C.L.E. did, and a planned 6-film franchise never materialized. Ritchie's live-action remake of the 1992 Disney animated classic Aladdin, on the other hand, was a smash hit that did over $1 billion at the global box office. But as a nearly shot-for-shot imitation of the animated original, the movie made Ritchie's personal filmmaking style all but invisible. Fans could be forgiven for suspecting Ritchie's auteur days were over and he would be leaning henceforth into more commercial studio fare. But in 2019, he wrote and directed The Gentleman, an action comedy about an American pot dealer who goes to England to sell his business. The movie earned comparisons to Lock, Stock, and The Gentleman was a box office success. Similarly, 2021's Wrath of Man, which reunited the director with Jason Statham for an action crime story, was warmly embraced by critics and fans. Since then, Ritchie has made 2 films. 2023's spy spoof Operation Fortune: Ruse de Guerre received mediocre reviews and was pulled from distribution because its Ukrainian villains were considered in bad taste after the outbreak of the Russo-Ukrainian War. Meanwhile, Guy Ritchie's The Covenant, a pensive war film set in Afghanistan, earned positive reviews but has also been specifically cited for its distracting use of Ritchie's stylistic trademarks. It's hard not to admire Ritchie's refusal to be stylistically pigeonholed, and certainly audiences don't just want to see him make endless remakes of his greatest hits, but it's also hard to ignore that Guy Ritchie seems to be most at home when he's telling stories about small-time criminals and lovable losers in the underworld of London and telling them in his own unique way. And that might be because, starting with The Hard Case, that style was specifically developed to tell those particular kinds of stories. That's why it's pretty hit or miss in other genres or when slathered on top of existing properties. The bottom line is that when he's in his wheelhouse, making the films he seems he was born to make, Guy Ritchie is one of the great directors of his time. So maybe he just stick to doing that. So what do you think? Are you a fan of Guy Ritchie? And if so, do you like his non-gangster films? Let us know down in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, you'll definitely find others you like if you check out the rest of the channel. As always, thank you for subscribing to Nerdstalgic.